Okay, so now we're going to get into Act 2, Scene 2. So to get started, you need to turn to page 54 of your No Fear Shakespeare books. And I'm going to read you out a summary. Of course, you've got the option of waiting until the end of the scene and then writing your own summary. A good rule of thumb is to try to break the scene into 2 to 3 parts, depending on how long it is, and dedicate one regular sized sentence to each part. So you'd end up with 2 to 3 sentences. So here's what I've got for my summary. Lady Macbeth waits in the courtyard for her husband. A shaken Macbeth appears to tell her he has killed Duncan. Lady Macbeth is forced to return the daggers to the chamber, covering her hands in blood. Soon after, a knocking is heard. Okay, so that's all I'm going to tell you for now, and we'll get into the scene. This is going to represent Lady Macbeth. This will be Macbeth. This scene takes place inside the courtyard of Inverness Castle at night. That which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. What hath quenched them have given me fire. Hark, peace! It was the owl that shrieked, the fatal bellman which gives the sternest good night. He is about it. The doors are open, and his surfeited grooms do mock their charges with snores. I have drugged their possets, that death and nature do contend about them, whether they live or die. Macbeth's voice is heard off stage. Who's there? What ho? Alack, I am afraid they have awaked, and 'tis not done. The attempt and not the deed confounds us. Hark! I laid their daggers ready. He could not miss 'em. Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. Enter Macbeth with bloody daggers. My husband! I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise? I heard an owl scream as the crickets cry. Did you not speak? When? Now. As I descended? Aye. Hark! Who lies in the second chamber? Donalbain. This is a sorry sight. A foolish thought to say a sorry sight. There's one did laugh and sleep, and one cried, Murder! That they did wake each other. I stood and heard them, but they did say their prayers, and address them again to sleep. There are 2 lodged together. One cried, God bless us, and Amen the other, as they had seen me with these hangman's hands. Listening their fear, I could not say Amen, when they did say God bless us. Consider it not so deeply. But wherefore could not I pronounce Amen? I had most need of blessing, and Amen stuck in my throat. These deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad. Methought I heard a voice cry, Sleep no more, Macbeth doth murder sleep. The innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, sore labour's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast. What do you mean? Still it cried, Sleep no more, to all the house. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more, Macbeth shall sleep no more. Who was it that cried? Why, worthy Thane, you do unbend your noble strength to think so brain-sickly of these things. Go, get some water, and wash this filthy witness from your hand. Why did you bring these daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go, carry them, and smear the sleepy grooms with the blood. I'll go no more. I'm afraid to think of what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not. Firm of purpose! Give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt. Whence is that knocking? How is't with me when every noise appals me? What hands are here? Ha! They pluck out mine eyes, with all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand. No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas of Incarnadine, making the green one red. Lady Macbeth re-enters with blood on her hands. My hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. I hear a knocking at the south entry. Retire, we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed. How easy it is then! Your constancy hath left you unattended. Hark! More knocking! Get on your nightgown, lest occasion call us and show us to be watchers. Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts. To know my deed, 'twere best not know myself. Wake Duncan with thy knocking. I would thou couldst. Okay, and so that is the end of Act 2, Scene 2. So I want you to return back to the start of the act and we'll make some annotations about language and themes. So we're starting on page 54 and we're going to look at Lady Macbeth's part here at the beginning of this scene when she is talking about the guards. So we're going to look at the second line when she says, "What has quenched them hath given me fire." And so quenched here means to put out. So when you cover something with water, like a fire, that means you've quenched it. So you've taken away its thirst. And so this is a double meaning of what's made them drunk, and it's putting them to sleep. So she's used liquid, in this case alcohol, drugged alcohol, to put them to sleep, and it's given her fire, so it's made her lively. Then there's an interesting part here where she hears what she says is an owl, but with the timing, it's easy to assume she's heard a scream, either from Duncan himself or one of his guards. So she's either heard an owl shriek or a man scream. So I chose to put a male screaming in my reading just to give you an idea of what she might have heard. And then she mentions in the next line, in the same line, the fatal bellman. So that is a reference. It's to a man who would ring a bell outside of a cell of a condemned man. So if you were condemned to death, you were going to be hung. There would be a man who would come and ring a bell. Now, later there's another mention of hanging or hangman. And Macbeth says he's got hangman's hands. Now, we might be likely to think in our modern times that a hangman would have quite clean hands, especially compared to other kinds of executioner, like someone who might behead someone. But in fact, hangmen would have had very bloody hands, a very bloody job, because they were tasked with taking somebody down from the noose after they were hanged, and they would draw and quarter them, so they would chop them up. If you've seen the movie Braveheart, that's an example of this, and I don't know what it was for. It might have been something to do with the afterlife. I would have to look that up, but it would mean that they would have very bloody hands, so that links closer to the bloody work of killing Duncan with a dagger. We're going to go down now to line 6. And she says, I have drugged their possets. So possets there referring to their drinks. So she's drugged their drinks. And then line 7, that death and nature do contend about them. So that means argue about them, whether they live or die. So it's almost like a Schrodinger's cat situation before Schrodinger's cat was a thing. She's talking about in this moment, they're either dead or alive. I don't know. So it's sort of the same thing. So if you don't know about Schrodinger's cat, that's an experiment where you put a cat inside a box. I believe there was a poison that could be ignited inside the box in the original experiment, and it was completely random whether the poison was let out. And so the thought experiment was, whilst the cat is inside the box, it's both dead and alive, because in your interpretation, in your knowledge, you don't know. It's one or the other. And so she's almost feeling the exact same way, where they're both dead and they're alive. She doesn't know. We'll go down to when she hears Macbeth speak as he's coming down the stairs. And it's a bit confusing here because she uses pronouns first to refer to Macbeth and then to Duncan without signaling the change. So she's basically saying, she's basically at first talking about herself, that if she was not so afraid, if she had been in Duncan's room earlier, and if he had not resembled her father, she'd have killed him. That's what she's basically saying. So she says, had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. So she's talking about Duncan when she says he there. And basically, this is a bit of irony within the play, so not to be confused with dramatic irony, though it could fall on that because we as an audience could pick this up, and obviously the characters don't know it. But Lady Macbeth, by her own measure about what makes a coward, is hereby classifying herself as a coward, because she was not able to kill Duncan. Okay, we're going to move on now. So page 56. And we're going to skip over Lady Macbeth's line of now and go down to Macbeth's line where he says, as I descended. So that just means, did you hear it as I came down the stairs? So this is setting up the confusion in their conversation that's going to take place. So throughout the rest, Macbeth starts unraveling. He starts having a bit of a mental breakdown, and he's basically talking about spirits and a disembodied voice telling him that he'll no longer get to sleep because of his guilt. And Lady Macbeth is trying to establish what did he really hear, because she's afraid that somebody, like Malcolm and Donalbain, who were in the next room, heard or witnessed the murder. So she's trying to find out if they have any loose ends to cover up, whilst Macbeth is ranting about things. So at the moment we can see he still has his faculties because he's checking, when did you hear this shriek? Like, was it actually Malcolm or Donalbain or somebody else in the household who heard the shriek? Or did you hear it as I was coming down the stairs? When did you hear this shriek? So that's an important line to note because it'll reflect his change in the next page. He looks down at his hands and he sees hangman's hands. And he starts talking about, on line 20, the chamberlains, the guards that he murdered. And he says that one woke up and shouted, murder! So he woke up almost from a nightmare, almost as though there was some sort of divine intervention taking place. But then they thought it was a dream, and they basically both said their prayers. And Lady Macbeth says, well, there were two next door. There was Malcolm and Donalbain. Are you worried about those? That's line 21, 22, 23, 24. Line 24, she says there were two lodged together. So that's referring to Malcolm and Donalbain next door. And you need to be careful about that because it might mean that they know what you did. Line 25, he says, they came at me with these hangman's hands. So that's referring to the blood from drawing and quartering their victims. And we're going to go down to line 30, where Macbeth says, I had most need of blessing and amen stuck in my throat. So basically, when he accidentally woke up the two guards, they started praying, and they were saying things like amen and God bless us. And they'd already seen Macbeth, but they obviously thought it was a dream, that because they were drugged and out of it. And Macbeth said that he wanted to say amen too. He wanted to take the blessing, but something stopped him. So here's this ongoing religious theme that to kill a king is going against God, and so you will remove yourself from God's grace and basically give yourself over to the devil and supernatural powers if you were to do such an evil thing. So yes, so Shakespeare here is suggesting that Macbeth has lost God's blessing in his act of murder. And we'll continue down line 33, the very last line of this page. Lady Macbeth says, stop talking about these things, it will make us mad. And that is such a good, easy line to highlight right now and take it to the front of your booklet and write it down, because it shows the theme of madness. It's the warning that Lady Macbeth gives that if we keep thinking about the murder, it will make us mad. And isn't that just an easy quote to remember? It will make us mad. And you can also reflect that if you were ever to do a character analysis on Lady Macbeth and connect it to when she does go mad. And you could say that she goes mad because she can't stop thinking about Duncan. Okay, page 58. Line 35, we see a metaphor. Macbeth says, sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care. So it basically means sleep soothes away our worries. And he's saying that some disembodied voice, some sort of spirit, it might be Hecate, it could be the devil, it could be the witches, has told him he won't be allowed to sleep anymore because of the murder. And so he won't get the respite he needs, the moment where he gets to soothe away his worries, that reparation of sleep. And it foretells that he is going to go crazy. And indeed he does. We're going to look a bit closer at the symbol, the image of blood. So line 43, Lady Macbeth says, you do unbend your noble strength to think so sickly of things. Go get some water and wash this filthy witness. So the quote there, this filthy witness, on line 45, is a figurative way. It's almost a personification of blood. So she's calling the blood a filthy witness, which means that she's giving the blood attributes of having seen the murder. What she's really meaning here is get away this evidence that would show people what you've done. Keep in mind, in Shakespeare's time and earlier, they didn't have DNA testing. So it was a lot easier to get away with murder. But one way you could be convicted with murder, and in fact it was a biblical way you could be convicted with murder, is if you had 2 or more witnesses. And if you had 2 or more witnesses, they could convict you. And so that was the most dangerous thing when you were committing a crime in these times, was to have a witness. So it's very interesting. It's almost religious symbology that she calls the blood a filthy witness. We're going to go to line 51. Lady Macbeth yells at him and says, infirm of purpose. So she calls him a coward. And here she's being such a hypocrite, because when she was in the chamber, she couldn't kill Duncan herself, even though earlier she said she would, because he looked like her father. And now she's saying, oh, you're a coward because you're not going to go back into the room. But we can tell she's only saying this because she doesn't want to go into the chamber and see what's happened. There is an interesting word down on line 54. She says, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal. And this imagery of golden blood, which is also tied up in the imagery of blood in general, is repeated when Macduff goes in and finds Duncan's body in the following scene. And Macduff uses a strange metaphor where he confuses everybody in the room by saying a church has been broken into and desecrated. And what he means is someone has desecrated the king's body. And they talk about his blood being golden. And this is, again, this idea that's pandering to King James's beliefs that kings are one step up from regular human beings and they're closer to God. They're somehow divine. And Lady Macbeth is playing into this by saying that Duncan's blood is golden, and she's going to use that golden blood and wipe it on the guards so everybody thinks that they're the ones who killed him. So that's another really good quote. I'll gild the faces of the grooms. I'll gild the faces of the grooms. And if you were ever going to write a paragraph or use the evidence of the blood imagery in an essay, that is a really good quote to use. And we'll go to the next page. 60, page 60, and we're looking at line 59, where Macbeth says, the multitudinous seas incarnadine. So what his incarnadine here means turn red. So the multitudinous seas incarnadine. Actually, we're going into scene 2 there. Wait, is this scene 2? Yes, it is. And we'll keep going down. Lady Macbeth says a very famous line on line 61 to 62. She says, my hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. So again, she's calling him a coward. So if you have a white heart, that means that blood doesn't get to it. And that means that you are somehow weak. And it's an easy quote to remember if you would like to record that in your booklets as well. Page 65, very ironically, she says, a little water clears us of this deed, and that's foreshadowing of her own mental break, because she becomes obsessed later on with cleaning her hands over and over again, and in fact, water cannot clear her from the deed. And then she says, your constancy hath left you unattended, which means firmness of purpose has abandoned you. So she's really insulting him after all of this. And that is the end. So I'll leave it there. Feel free to start working on the activities of your booklet. Again, if you run into any troubles in your booklet and you can't answer an activity, please log into Teams through Office 365 and pose any questions there. Good luck, guys.